morning. I'll check to make sure the mic's working real quick. I thought it would never catch on, Michael. Having grown up, or not having grown up really, but having been through SIBI, every time somebody gets up to preach for chapels or even at the church, the phrase is preach the word. It's an encouragement for those who are coming up to speak before all, so that they'll be encouraged to do so. It's like giving a little bit of a fire right before you go to play a game or something. It's just that extra excitement, that extra encouragement before you get ready to start. And so I'll always do it. If you guys want to chime in, you're certainly welcome to. It's not necessarily something you have to do, but it is for me anyway. I just think it's really good, and it's encouraging, especially. So, like Michael, I guess I kind of have a little bit of an announcement. It wasn't scripted or anything, but just a reminder for those of you who are in high school, junior high. We normally have small groups on Sunday evenings, and this Sunday evening is going to be canceled due to the academic rodeo. We're hoping to encourage as many as possible to be around. I've heard many numbers about how many people end up coming through this building during this time, and I've heard 2,000, I've heard more and less, but that's a lot of people. And so if we have the ability to make any type of impact at all in the community, we want to do that, especially since there's a lot of young people coming through here. Encouraging some of you younger guys and gals to spend some time here if you can, reaching out. It's your responsibility as well. Now that you are the church, it's your responsibility to go out and preach the gospel to people too. So as we get a chance to do that, I encourage everybody to come to that after we get everything settled here and it gets ready to begin. I didn't make any slides, unfortunately. Sorry about that. But if you look in your bulletin, you will see the title of my lesson is Mentoring Like Moses. Today we're going to be talking about Moses, of course, but we're also going to be talking about a little bit about his protege, his apprentice, his mentee, I guess you can call him, Joshua. Is such an important man in the Old Testament. He has an entire book for himself. But all of that stems from a relationship that he built with the first leader, human leader, I guess I should say, of Israel. Obviously, God was behind everything, but he entrusted a man named Moses to go out and prepare his people for what was to come. And then after Moses was finished, it was Joshua's turn. But to give us a little context for this lesson, to prepare us for what we're about to learn, I do want to talk a little bit about what we've just been through in Scripture in order to get to where we are. We're going to be starting in Exodus chapter 17. But in order for us to fully understand this relationship that we're going to be talking about, we need to understand how we got to where we are. So God began his nation of Israel with a man named Abram. And he made a promise to that man, and he said, "Come out of this land, the land of your family, Ur the Chaldees, and I will take you to a land that you will own, that you will possess, and it will be yours, and it will be passed down from generation to generation." He also makes another promise. He says, "Look at the stars in the sky. Look at the sand by the sea." And he says, "Can you number it? So will your generations be. So will your offspring be." He's making a promise for his family to grow, as well as a land that he'll promise. Now, Abraham's an old man at this time. First time he's visited, he's 75. He's an old, well, I guess if you don't consider 75 old, then that's okay. I'm not trying to offend anybody or anything. But, 75, imagining having your first child at 75, I'm sure you can imagine how that's kind of daunting. And, of course, that promise is not fulfilled until he's 100. But this promise is passed down. The promise of the land, the promise of the nation is passed down to from Abraham to his son Isaac. And then from Isaac to his son Jacob. And then Jacob is passing down his blessings as well. And we know Jacob had 12 sons, a great many children, if you don't understand how many children 12 sons is. But he had 12 sons, and each one had their own special designation. But one of those sons he had favor for, and that was Joseph. And it was because of the wife that he had that child with. And so he has a son, Joseph, and the rest of his brothers, the rest of his siblings, hated him because he was favored, as you can imagine. And so what happens is they send him off into slavery, and he goes through this whole trial in Egypt where he's thrown in and out of prison, and he's despised, and he's loved, and he's despised, and he's loved. And he gets to a point where God has helped him to become the second most high in the entire land. And a famine comes. Now, the entirety of God's people, Israel, at this point, they're about to be finished because they didn't store up for the past 7 years. They didn't know the famine was coming, but God, through provision, helped Joseph understand that. And Joseph, in turn, helps to save the entirety of the land because of being able to interpret dreams, because of God's will. And so because of this, he ends up bringing his family to Egypt so that they may be saved through God's plan. And even at the end in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, Joseph is talking to his brothers, and they're terrified that he's going to try and pay back. And he says, listen, you meant terrible things by sending me out into slavery. You meant all of this for evil, but God knew. He meant this for good so that his people may be saved. And then we get into the beginning of Exodus where Moses now is asked to lead the people. And of course, there's this whole story with Moses and him going back and forth with God and being terrified of leading the people of Israel. Verses 3 or chapter 3 on, and he's just terrified. But he eventually gives in, and he does what God commands. And then he goes to Egypt, where he tells the Pharaoh, who's now in charge and is treating Israel very badly. And he goes and he tells them to let the people go. And there's these 10 plagues, terrible plagues, and a lot of people suffer. And eventually Pharaoh finally lets him go, and then they chase after him, and they cross the sea. And now we've got a new nation who's being led by Moses through God. So God's really in charge. Moses is just kind of the beacon, the words, the mouthpiece, you may call it. And he's starting to tell the people how they're going to be provided for because of God. God brought them out of Egypt. He's not just going to let them die in the wilderness. He has a plan for them. And so Moses, as he's going about all of this, he's relying on his brother, the better speaker, Aaron. But also, he uses this as an opportunity to teach someone else how to lead. Now, going back to when Moses first began at the burning bush in Exodus chapter 3, Moses talked about not being a very good speaker. And he talked about how he just couldn't do it. And now not only is he leading the people, but he is also teaching an individual who's going to be next in line what he needs to do. And as we go through this, I want you guys to think about the different things we're talking about and reading, and think about how this can apply to us today. Of course, I'm going to make an application here at the end, but start thinking about this on your own as well, so that as we're going through, we can start to tie these pieces together as a group here. So Exodus chapter 17, verses 8 through 15. We're beginning our relationship between Moses and Joshua, our focus for today. And we're starting to see the beginning of this relationship. Now here we get to see what we call the first interaction between the two. And it's not really as much of an interaction as much as it is a command or job that's told of Moses for Joshua. So Exodus chapter 17, verses 8 through 15. Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, "Choose for us men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand at the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand." So Joshua did as Moses commanded and fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up on the top of the hill. Whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed, and whenever he lowered his hands, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew weary. So they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it while Aaron and Hur held up his hands, and one on each side, and the other on the other side. So his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Write this as a memorial in a book, and recite it in the ears of Joshua. And recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven." And Moses built an altar and called the name of it, "The Lord is my banner." So we see here a couple different things. Number one, Moses trusts Joshua with this responsibility. He looks at Joshua and he says, "Joshua, get you some men and go down, and you're going to fight." And so he entrusts in him the leadership of the army at this point. We've just come out of Egypt. We're starting to prepare ourselves for what's to come. And now we're at war. And so he says, "We're at war, Joshua. You're the commander at arms. I need you to put together a troop and go out there." But he says almost one of the most terrifying things that I could imagine. He says, the whole battle is going to rely on whether or not I can hold my hands up. Hold my staff up and my hand up, right? And so he says, as long as I do that, we're going to win. Now Joshua, of course, doesn't ask any questions. He just says, "All right, I'll do it." He runs out there and finds him some good fighting men, and he runs down there and he starts to meet Amalek on the battlefield. Now for Joshua, I mean, you've seen some different things, right? You've seen leaving Egypt, being protected, the Red Sea, all of these things. But now your life and the lives of all of those you have went to and personally talked to about coming out for this battle are at risk, basically because you're relying on one man's strength of his arms. Imagine the fear that starts to go through the mind of our young mentee here, Joshua. When you look up on the hill and Moses' arms are wavering, and then you look out at the army and Amalek's men are pushing in and they're actually getting through. Lives are being lost. But you don't run away. You trust Moses. You trust God. And so what you do is you keep fighting. And then you look back up and then you see Aaron and Hur helping Moses hold his arms up, and you're like, now we got it. Keep pushing, men. And they prevail. And the Lord provides for them a victory that day. It's kind of a scary thought. But this is the first time in which we see Moses teaching Joshua a lesson. He said, listen, God is in control. He's in control of our physical lives. If he can control these things, if we can trust in him, and if he's going to provide, then we know that this is truth. Flip on over to Exodus chapter 24. We get our next experience between Joshua and Moses. Exodus 24, we're going to be reading verses 12 through 18. So we've seen a physical experience. We've seen a war being fought and faith and trust being put into his mentor Moses and those around him. Verses 12 through 18 of Exodus chapter 24, we see a spiritual experience, a teaching in a spiritual nature. Exodus 24, verses 12 through 18. The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and wait there, that I may give you the tablets of stone and with the law and the commandments which I have written for their instruction." We're on the mount now. We're being given the commandments that's going to be presented to the whole of Israel that they may follow. So in verse 13, so Moses rose with his assistant, Joshua, and Moses went up into the mountain of God. And he said to the elders, Wait here for us until we return to you. And behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a dispute, let him go with them. Then Moses went up on the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. The glory of the Lord dwelt on Mount Sinai. And the cloud covered it 6 days. And on the seventh day, he called to Moses out of the midst of the cloud. Now the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the sight of the people of Israel. Moses entered the cloud and went up on the mountain, and Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. Now, immediately following this, we have another story about how the rest of Israel responds. What happens is they're terrified. They say the Lord has killed Moses. And so the bright idea is brought up to build a calf, to worship, which we know ends up in a terrible, is just a terrible idea. And yet they do it anyway. They see this natural experience going around, spiritual and natural experience, this terrifying experience. Fire, clouds, lightning, thunder, all of these natural experiences. And they're terrified. But the crazy thing is Joshua's up there on the mountain with Moses. And they sit there for a while before Moses is even called to talk to God. And yet he's sitting there in that time. He gets to experience the commandments given to Moses firsthand, right there. They get to have, you can imagine in the conversations going up the mountain and down the mountain. And the fact that we're actually sitting in the presence of God as he's giving these commands to his people through Moses. All right. Now we get to see our last experience here before we move on to a little bit different of an idea. In Exodus chapter 32. Exodus 32, verses 17 through 21. So what we've been seeing so far is training. We've been seeing a man, Moses, taking up a young person, Joshua, to teach them what they need to know to become the next leader, to become the next spiritual guide for others as well. So we've seen a physical experience in our war with Amalek. We've seen a spiritual experience with being on the mount as we've received the Ten Commandments. And now we get to see there's many more lessons, obviously, that have been passed on through Moses. But for sake of time, we won't read the vast majority of Exodus. But now we're in Exodus chapter 32. We get to see a leadership experience. We get to see, Joshua now gets to see how this leader responds, and he gets to take away from that what he can for his future tasks as well. Exodus 32, 17 through 21. When Joshua heard the noise of the people as he's coming down from the mountain, they're worshiping this golden calf now. And they're celebrating and worshiping aloud. And it says in verse 17 again, when Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, "There's a noise of war in the camp." But he said, "It's not the sound of shouting for victory or the sound of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing that I hear." And as soon as he came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot, and he threw the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf that they had made and burned it with fire and ground it into powder and scattered it on the water and made the people of Israel drink it. And Moses said to Aaron, "What did this people do to you that you have brought such a great sin upon them?" So Joshua, on the way down from the mountain, he learns what to listen for. He learns what to hear from his people. What the different attitudes, the sounds, the celebrations, the pain, the hurt, the happy. He hears what that sounds like. He gets a chance to hear from Moses specifically what to look for in his people. And then next, we get to see what not to do in a leader. Not to let our anger raise to such a level in which we break the commandments that God has given. We get to see a burning anger that overwhelms and causes us sometimes to do things we regret, things we wish not to do. And then we get to see maybe one of the most significant lessons. And Jesus even talks about this in the New Testament. Sometimes family can be the problem. And we can't be afraid to confront them. Moses comes down, he says, Aaron, what in the world could these people have done to make you do something like this? And Aaron was complacent. He was kind of a part of the problem, right? And Moses gets on to him. He says, you're supposed to be one of the leaders. You've seen what God can do. Why are you worshiping a calf? Why are you building a calf to worship? So Joshua gets to see the significance of the message, even over family. It's an important message. It's one delivered from God. And so we need to make sure not to let things get in the way of that. And our mentor is teaching this very greatly as well. Okay, so let's flip on over to Numbers chapter 14. Now, this one's going to be a longer verse. So we've reached the end of our first point, okay? And I know the vast majority of this lesson is going to be all this first point, because what I want you guys to see is how this works. So we've been doing nothing but teaching this far. Moses has been teaching his apprentice, Joshua. And he's been teaching him all of these different significant stories. And of course, like I said, there's more and more and more stories. And we could even just pick apart Moses' life and the decisions he makes and Joshua being present. And yet, we just don't have enough time. Like I said, we could just sit here and read all of Exodus, Deuteronomy, Numbers. We could read them all. And we could just sit here and pick apart each and every verse, because these are all lessons Joshua can learn. But now what we want to see is what that looks like. What that time and effort and energy looks like when it comes to application for this young man, for Joshua. Okay. Numbers chapter 14. Verses 1 through 12. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in the wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to one another, let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly and the congregation of the people of Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes, and said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, the land which we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear. Then all the congregation said to stone them with stones, but the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the people of Israel. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will this people despise me, and how long will they not believe in me in spite of all the signs that I have done among them? I will strike them with the pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than they. So we see what's happened after the people, or the spies have been sent out. They've been sent out and they've come back, and it just so happens that Joshua and another man, Caleb, are some of those spies, and they're the only two that come back and confess that this land that they're looking to going to is good. It's what the Lord promised. The others are terrified because they see these large people and these large cities, and they're terrified that they can't do it, and so they say, "This is not. The Lord can't even help us take this." But Joshua, having the experiences he has, and Caleb, of course, as well, with their great faith, say, the Lord can provide anything. And he'll provide this land. And he stands before the people with Moses and with Aaron, the leaders. As the people are about to stone them, they're about to kill them because of their anger and their regret of ever having left the land of Egypt. And Joshua stands with them as well. We see the faith being passed down. It's given through time and experiences and intentional training opportunities. When Joshua went up on the mount with Moses, Moses didn't have to take him up there. It wasn't a requirement in order to receive the Ten Commandments. He chose it because he knew Joshua. He chose it because he needed to train the next leader. So we see the mentorship that Joshua's a part of, starting to come through in his life and his relationship with the people. His fear is gone, or it's leaving. Of course, you can't be without fear all the time. But his fear has subsided, and he knows who to trust, and he knows what to say now. All right, our last section here, Joshua chapter 1. If you would flip over there with me. So we see that the morals that Moses is starting to bestow on Joshua are starting to come to fruition. They're coming through in his actions, in his life. So we get to Joshua. Now we're going to read the whole first chapter. So buckle down. Joshua chapter 1. Now, the end of Deuteronomy, we get to this point where Moses does something in opposition to the Lord. And Moses has made this promise, or God has made this promise to Moses that unfortunately he will not get the opportunity to see the promised land. He will not get to be a part of that. And so now we get to the end of Moses' life and all of the great deeds that he's done in leading the people and in the faith that he's had. We get to the end of his life, and now it's time. A lot of us would like to say the phrase sink or swim, right? It's time. It's time now, Joshua. I've taught you as much as I can teach you. I don't have any more time. It's your time. Joshua chapter 1, starting with verse 1 and going through the end of the chapter. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore, rise, go over this Jordan, and you and all the people into the land that I am giving to them, to the people of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I promised to Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites to the great sea, towards the going down of the sun, shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life, just as I was with Moses. So I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to all the law that Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. Verse 8, this book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Verse 10, and Joshua commanded the officers of the people, pass through the midst of the camp and command these people, prepare your provisions, for within 3 days you are to pass over this Jordan to go in to take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess. And to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, remember the word that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, saying, the Lord your God is providing you a place of rest, and I will give you this land. Your wives and your little ones and your livestock shall remain in the land that Moses gave you beyond the Jordan, but all the men of valor among you shall pass over armed before your brothers and shall help them, until the Lord gives rest to your brothers as he has to you, they also take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving them. Then you shall return to the land of your possession and shall possess it, the land that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you beyond the Jordan towards the sunrise. Verse 16. And they answered Joshua, all that you have commanded us, we will do. And wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we obeyed Moses in all things, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your command and disobeys your word, whatever you command him, shall be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. So Moses is gone. Joshua's been placed into his new role as leader of the land of Israel, leader of the people of God, and he's told what he is to do. So what Joshua does is he goes to the leadership, he informs them what's going to happen, and he tells them that they're going to be going into the land. He gives the direction with the confidence and passion that Moses did. Doesn't mean he's not afraid of what may come. And that's why the Lord continually encourages him. He says, be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous. Because it's frightening. Being put into leadership can be frightening. But he says, be strong and courageous. Do the relationship that Joshua's had with Moses. The people know him. They know that he was being trained for this role. They've grown up with him. They've been with him through wars, through famine, through darkness, through all of these different things. They've experienced it with him. They know him. They respect him. They obey him. After this, Joshua does as what's commanded. He takes his people into the Holy Lands. He guides them into the land that God has promised. His faith and leadership, the faith and leadership of Moses, has now been passed down to the next generation. The next leader of the people, the next leader of the congregations, the one who's going to guide them into their now future success. That's our responsibility. Of course, this is an Old Testament story. This is one that we probably haven't dove into in this type of a way, or if we have, definitely not many times. But there's so much we can learn as Christians from these types of relationships, from these types of stories of the Old Testament. As Christians, we're called to do the same. We're called to reach out to the next generation. We're called to reach out to those who are younger than us, those who are experiencing things we have been through, those who do not quite understand the gospel as well as us, those who have chosen not to take up leadership roles yet. We're called to those people. We're called to disciple them. We're called to teach them. And we're called to help them figure out what their role is in all of this. Joshua could have just been another person. He could have been at the bottom of the mountain worshiping a golden calf. But Moses took him. He sat down with him. He talked with him. He taught him. He showed him how powerful the Lord is. He showed him what he could do. He took him up on the mountain. Got to experience the whole giving of the Ten Commandments. That's our calling today. We're called to not create, but to guide the next generation of leaders. The next generation of leaders in the church. Those who are in some type of a role that we have already passed. I'm trying to think. I can't be a teenager if I'm a grandparent. But what I can do is teach a teenager how to get through some struggles that I went through as a teenager. If I'm a parent, I'm not a grandparent. So grandparents can help teach the parents. And they can help them teaching their children. They can help them understand the different difficulties that there are. They can listen to problems. Man, that's a big thing right now. With all of the many things going on in this world, sometimes just sitting down and listening to people and the frustrations they're dealing with is one of the biggest things you can do. help guiding them through some of those difficulties, sitting there with them in the times of difficulties, experiencing it with them. It's not easy. This is our calling in our world today, is we're called from God to help raise up leaders. Now, you guys know, to some extent, I've been through AIM, and kind of the AIM motto is Luke chapter 12, or Luke chapter 10, verse 2. There's plenty of harvest in the field, but the laborers are few. Well, unfortunately, there can't be more laborers unless we train them how to do the job that they're meant to do. Our Great Commission, go into the world and teach the gospel. After we've baptized them and discipled them, it's time to teach them how to observe the commands, how to step into their role. So I'd encourage you, if you're a great-grandparent, teach grandparents. If you're a grandparent, teach parents. If you're a parent, teach your children. If you're a teenager, teach the middle schoolers. It's a big deal, guys. Because if we don't start working, if we don't start teaching others how to fill in these roles, before long, there's not going to be any leadership in the church. And it's tough. And the leadership who are in the church may not know how to do it. And that's just a tough situation to go through. We need to train up and keep continuing to train leaders. Because this generation that's leading right now, they can do a good job. We need to keep passing down those ideas and those morals and those teachings that we've learned. So I'd encourage you, Titus chapter 2, Titus chapter 1. I'd go ahead and write it down. Didn't have enough time to read 2 more chapters. I encourage you to read those because that's a New Testament example. One where Paul and one of his disciples that he's created, or not created, I keep on saying created, one of his disciples that he mentored and taught, Titus. He's writing a letter to him to help him understand what to teach and what to share. And he shares a really good message about learning, or about encouraging those to continue to try and mentor and teach and guide. So read Titus chapter 1 and Titus chapter 2 if you get a chance. And please, as we leave here today, don't let this message fall on deaf ears. Find somebody you can mentor, somebody you can relationship with, someone you can teach how to experience this life and make it through as a Christian. And teach them how to teach someone else. Oh, how much better a place this world would be if we would all continue to teach and share the Word of God with those who truly need it. If you have any need at this time, whether that is prayers for a challenge you're experiencing, or whether that is that you haven't had a chance to become a part of the kingdom of God, you haven't had a chance to be baptized into the name of Jesus, we can take care of any of those. But if you have any of those needs, please come up as we stand and sing our song of invitation.